Hi everyone, it's Rachel from Right Side Blonde. I am very excited today because it is my inaugural George video. I have to show the inaugural issue of George for this special video since it's the first one. What my plan is just to pick a different magazine every week or so and highlight an article from within it. The reason I'm doing this is because I think we can all agree there's a lot of nuggets in these magazines. And I was very interested after I received the February of 1997 issue, Survival Guide to the Future, that talks about the year 2020, the certain lung-attacking virus that will be wiping the planet out, all of those things. So as a result of that magazine, I've gotten quite a few more, and I wanted to share with you what I find in these magazines. Today, I'm going to be highlighting the magazine from April 1997. The reason I chose this one is because it's one of Vincent Fusca's favorite magazines, and as you know from pictures maybe or from TV, he wears shirts with George magazines on them. This is one of his favorites. He's worn this one before, and I find it interesting that at the bottom it says, "Can America be saved?" And anyone who's awake knows that we're in a battle right now, and there's a lot of good stuff in this magazine. The article that I chose today is by Tony Blankley. And it highlights journalism, it talks about media, and it talks about bipartisanship and why it might not be the best thing. So think of this as your story hour. Sit back, relax, and listen, and compare and contrast what's going on in this article with what's happening today. I think you'll find it pretty interesting. George Orwell famously observed that political language is designed to make lies sound truthful and murder respectable. Orwell did not write these words in cynicism. He wrote them as a spur to honest language, without which effective political thought and action are impossible. It is now more than 50 years since Orwell wrote those words, 50 years of sham, puffery, guileful mendacity, and straight-faced lying by politicians, all reported on by a bogus class of mainline journalists who are often flacks for the political establishment. As Newt Gingrich's spokesman for the past 7 years, and for 6 years before that as a communications tactician and policy analyst on Ronald Reagan's White House staff, I've had enough. And to paraphrase John le Carre, like everyone who has had enough, I want more. I was part of a team that tried to present conservative ideas to the American people through the terrible gauntlet of the Washington political class. Usually those ideas came out on the other end distorted and misunderstood. I have seen honest purveyors of liberal ideas suffer the same fate. Now, as I approach 50, I would like to try to translate the words and actions of Washington culture into their true meaning. Consequently, I shall dedicate this space each month to the scrutiny of addle-headed politicians and journalists. Politicians think they know what's best for the public, and journalists think they guard the public from errant politicians. But quis custodiet ipsos custodes? Who guards the guards? It is with special relish and verve that I volunteer to scrutinize and torment those journalists and politicians who fall short of their own high-blown rhetoric. I just hope I don't fall into the same trap. One of the most enduring charades perpetrated by the political class on a dreamy-eyed public is the idea that there is a thing called bipartisanship, and that it is good. My experience suggests the opposite. I've never sat in a back room and heard a politician thump the table to argue that for the greater good of bipartisanship, we should support something we neither believe in nor will benefit from. Politicians act out of a combination of convictions and self-interest. This doesn't mean parties can't from time to time work together. Last year was both deliciously partisan and historically productive. President Clinton signed the Republican welfare bill because it was in his political self-interest to do so. Republicans passed a Democratic minimum wage bill for the same reason. Bipartisanship had nothing to do with either. And I would remind you that both parties supported the war effort in World War II not because of bipartisanship, but because of Pearl Harbor. But in the absence of war, we need partisanship to blast away the status quo. Our constitutional separation of powers makes it extremely difficult to change policy. For almost 200 years, the success of that system has relied on partisan debate. Lyndon Johnson's Great Society and FDR's New Deal were both made possible by the triumph and dominance of one party over the other. Ironically, the prejudice against partisanship goes back to our founding fathers, just about the only mistake they made. James Madison in the Federalist Papers condemned factions because they were more disposed to vex and oppress each other than to cooperate for their common good. George Washington declared himself above parties. By the end of the 18th century, the idea of partisanship as malign was fixed in our collective psyche. Yet it was just at this point that national political parties began to emerge, not as narrow special interests, but as broadly based institutions aimed at reforming society. The great English language statesmen, Jackson, Lincoln, Disraeli, Gladstone, the Roosevelts, did not stand above parties. They led them as vehicles to advance the general welfare. And I would add my former boss, Newt Gingrich, to the list of great partisans. It is because Newt organized House Republicans to run and win a partisan campaign in 1999 calling for a balanced budget, capital gains tax cuts, and the end of big government that President Clinton is now supporting those issues. Today, however, the national media demean partisanship by characterizing such vital fights as balancing the budget, restructuring Medicare, and ending the welfare entitlement as partisan bickering. And because journalists teach the public to despise partisanship, shallow politicians feign respect for it. Such blind homage to bipartisanship means that crucial political battles are not fought. Instead, bipartisanship produces armistices without victory and policies without coherence. In the next year or two, you're likely to see the worst fruits of phony bipartisanship. Senate Majority Leader Trent Lott, understandably, wants to show that he can close deals better than his predecessor did, or Newt does. President Clinton needs to deliver to deflect attention from the scandal onslaught. The risk is that the desire to close a deal can become more important than the deal's contents. Congress and the president may very well agree to a balanced budget that won't be imbalanced, to campaign finance reform that won't reform the financing of campaigns, and to a rescue of Medicare that will leave it on or over the brink of collapse. Sometimes solving a policy problem means someone has to lose and someone has to win. To fight for your party is not to be blind, it is to be far-sighted. Just as economists rejoice in Keynes' animal spirits of the marketplace, the engine for investment and growth, political observers and the public should rejoice in partisanship. We couldn't live without it. Very interesting, I thought. The part about the media, the part about just getting along and not really fighting for the issues, I thought those were very similar to what we're dealing with today. What do you guys think? Leave your questions and comments below, and I look forward to reading the next article here soon.
Magazine, George, which is a hoot of a magazine. I thought you were a lawyer.
I was.
What happened?
Well, we decided, actually taking a cue from folks like yourself and you around the 1992 election, that there was an opportunity here to change the definition of a political magazine. Certainly the way Americans were accessing information about politics and politicians was changing. Candidates were appearing on late-night talk shows, on talk radio, on sitcoms, and there was a kind of a leveling process, and while the rest of media clearly had caught up with that, we felt that political magazines per se hadn't.
Your mother was a hell of an editor at Doubleday.
That's what I hear.
Would she have liked George?
I think she would have.